The heel of her shoe snapped somewhere between the 32nd floor and the emergency stairwell. Imani Balagan didn't stop running. Her palm left a bloody smear against the fire door as she pushed through, the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue. Behind her, the muffled bass of the gala continued its relentless pulse, a heartbeat for the wealthy and corrupt who danced above Seoul's glittering skyline, oblivious to what she'd just witnessed in that private room. Or perhaps not oblivious at all. The summer heat hit her like a wall when she burst onto the rooftop terrace. August in Seoul was suffocating even at midnight, the humidity wrapping around her throat like the fingers that had been there 20 minutes ago. She stumbled forward, her torn evening gown catching on the decorative stonework, and for a moment she considered the edge. Just for a moment. 34 floors down, the city sprawled in waves of light and shadow. She could disappear into it. Become nothing. Finally stop running from a man who owned half the politicians in this country and all of her nightmares. But the memory of what she'd seen, what she'd photographed, burned against her thigh where the phone pressed through the hidden pocket of her dress. They would find her if she stayed here. Minister Kang's security detail was already sweeping the building. She'd heard them on the 31st floor, speaking in clipped Korean about the senator's woman and containment. As if she were a spill to be cleaned up. A mess to be erased. 5 years. 5 years she'd survived Park Sung-jin's cruelty, his possessive rages, his careful reconstruction of her identity until she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. The Nigerian architect who'd come to Seoul for a prestigious firm internship had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, until all that remained was a beautiful prop for a monster's arm. But tonight, she'd seen something that made all those years of abuse feel almost insignificant. Tonight, she'd seen the real monster. Before we continue, if stories filled with dangerous secrets, emotional tension, and powerful mafia romance keep you hooked until the very end, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because tonight's story only gets darker from here. The rooftop access door slammed open behind her. Imani ran. She made it to the service elevator before her vision started to blur. The fingerprints on her throat were already darkening. She could feel them throbbing with each heartbeat. Sung-jin had been rougher than usual when she tried to leave the party, his grip tightening when she'd mentioned feeling unwell. He'd known something was wrong. He always knew. But for once, she'd been faster than his suspicion. The elevator descended with agonizing slowness, stopping on the 28th floor to admit a maintenance worker who took one look at her torn dress, her swelling throat, and the mascara tracking down her cheeks, and immediately looked away. That was Seoul's underworld etiquette. See nothing. Know nothing. Survive. The lobby was a blur of black marble and gold accents, impossibly elegant, impossibly cold. Imani had been here before at 3 other events where Sung-jin had paraded her like a trophy, but she'd never noticed how the security cameras tracked movement with mechanical precision. How the concierge's smile never reached his eyes. She pushed through the revolving doors and met the wall of August heat again, but this time it felt like freedom. The streets around the Cheongdam luxury district were quieter at this hour, most of the clientele already inside the private clubs that didn't advertise their existence. Imani kicked off her remaining heel and walked barefoot on concrete still warm from the day's sun, not knowing where she was going, only knowing she had to move. Her phone buzzed against her thigh. She didn't look at it. She knew what it would say. She knew whose name would appear on the screen, alternating between false sweetness and barely contained rage until she answered. Until she came back. Until she apologized for making him worry and accepted whatever punishment he deemed appropriate for her disobedience. Except this time, there would be no coming back. This time, she had evidence. Imani's legs gave out in the alley behind the Rayon Hotel, a shadow-draped corridor between 2 buildings that reeked of kitchen exhaust and old cigarette smoke. She slid down the concrete wall, her dress tearing further, and pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. She didn't realize she was sobbing until a voice cut through the darkness. "You're bleeding." Her head snapped up. A man stood at the mouth of the alley, backlit by the glow of the street. Tall, broad-shouldered. His silhouette was sharp enough to cut, and when he stepped closer, the faint light caught the edge of a tattoo crawling up his neck, black ink disappearing beneath the collar of an immaculate black shirt. "I'm fine," she heard herself say. The lie tasted like ash. "You're bleeding," he repeated, "and you're sitting in the service alley of one of my properties at midnight, barefoot, in a dress that costs more than most people's monthly rent." His Korean was precise. Cold. The accent was soul-born, but something underneath it suggested he'd learned to speak in rooms where people listened or died. Imani tried to stand. Her legs refused. "I just need a moment," she managed. "I'll leave." The man didn't respond. He simply watched her with the kind of stillness that belonged to predators, the patient, calculating stillness of someone who had learned that violence was more effective when it was unhurried. Then he pulled out his phone. "Hyung," he said quietly. "I need a car at the Rayon's East Service entrance. Now." The pause. "And have Dr. Yoon on standby." "I don't need," Imani started. "You need a hospital," he interrupted, stepping closer. The light finally caught his face, and something in her stomach went cold. She knew that face. Not personally, she'd never met him, but she'd seen photographs in Sungjin's private study. Surveillance images. Threat assessments. She'd heard his name spoken in the hushed, reverent tones that powerful men reserved for those they genuinely feared. Kwon Ji-hoon, the cold Korean Mafia boss who controlled the Gangnam underground. The man even Minister Kang refused to cross directly. The sole crime lord whose empire stretched from luxury real estate to pharmaceutical distribution to enterprises that never appeared on any official record. She should have been more afraid. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Because if Park Sungjin was hunting her, there was only one force in Seoul that might be capable of stopping him. And she'd just collapsed at his feet. Ji-hoon had learned to read people the way other men read financial statements, with cold precision and an eye for what wasn't being said. The woman in his private medical suite was a study in contradictions. Her dress was Valentino, custom-fitted, the kind of piece that required an invitation to even view. Her jewelry was minimal but exquisite, small diamond studs, a delicate gold chain that had snapped during whatever violence she'd fled. Her manicure was flawless, her makeup professionally applied despite its current ruin. Everything about her screamed wealth, power, the polished exterior of a woman who belonged in the penthouses and private galas of Seoul's elite. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "The bruising on her throat is consistent with manual strangulation," Dr. Yoon reported quietly, his voice pitched low enough that the woman, Imani, according to the ID they'd found in her hidden pocket, couldn't hear from across the room. "The cuts on her hands are defensive wounds. Glass, most likely. And she's severely dehydrated." Ji-hoon said nothing. "She's also terrified," Dr. Yoon added. "Not of you, specifically. Of everything. I've seen that look before. This wasn't a single incident. This was prolonged," Ji-hoon finished. The doctor nodded grimly. Ji-hoon watched as a female nurse helped Imani change into clean clothing, soft cotton, nothing that would alarm her, and noted the way she flinched at every shadow, every unexpected sound. Her eyes kept darting to the windows as if expecting someone to appear. Her shoulders never relaxed. He knew that posture. He'd worn it himself, once, in a lifetime that felt like it belonged to someone else. "She needs rest," Dr. Yoon said. "And probably a therapist. But she refused to let us contact anyone. No family. No friends. No police." "No police," Ji-hoon repeated, and something cold settled in his chest. In his world, there were only 2 types of people who refused police involvement: those who lived outside the law, and those who feared the law couldn't protect them. Looking at Imani Balogun, her elegant bearing, her expensive dress, her terrified eyes, he knew exactly which category she fell into. And he was starting to suspect why. She was asleep when he entered the room 2 hours later. The medical suite was attached to his private residence on the 73rd floor of the Jean Tower, a building he owned outright and had constructed with 17 hidden floors that didn't appear on any official blueprint. The windows were bulletproof. The doors were reinforced. The entire floor was accessible only by a private elevator that required 3 separate biometric confirmations. It was the safest place in Seoul. And she looked like she was still waiting for someone to break through the walls. Even in sleep, Imani's brow was furrowed. Her hands were clenched into fists. She'd positioned herself with her back to the corner, instinctively minimizing the angles from which she could be approached. Ji-hoon had done the same thing for years after his father's men had stopped using him as a punching bag and started using him as a weapon instead. He sat in the chair across from her bed and waited. It took 43 minutes for her to wake. He'd counted. He always counted seconds, minutes, hours. Time was a resource, and resources were power, and power was survival. When her eyes finally opened, there was a split second of blind panic before recognition settled over her features. "You're still here," she said. Her voice was hoarse. Damaged. "It's my building." A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but close, crossed her face. "Fair point. Do you know who I am?" The question was deliberate. He wanted to see how she'd respond, whether she would pretend ignorance or acknowledge the danger she'd willingly accepted by collapsing in his territory. Imani met his eyes directly. "You're Kwon Ji-hoon. You control most of the Gangnam Underground and significant portions of the Yongsan and Mapo districts. Your organization handles everything from real estate to pharmaceutical distribution to private security contracts. You have connections in government, law enforcement, and international finance. And you're one of the only men in Seoul that Park Sung-jin is afraid of." Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but internally, something sharpened. "You know a great deal about the Seoul underworld," he observed, "for a woman who appears to be an architect." "I'm an architect who spent 5 years as Park Sung-jin's possession," she said flatly. "I know what I was allowed to overhear. I know what I was forced to witness. And I know what I wasn't supposed to find." "What did you find?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to her hands, still bearing the small cuts from whatever glass she'd broken through. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Something that could destroy him. And a lot of other powerful people." Ji-hoon leaned forward slightly. "Then why are you telling me this? You've just admitted to possessing dangerous information. You're alone, injured, in the private residence of a man you've correctly identified as a crime lord. By any rational assessment, you should be protecting that information, not advertising it." Imani's laugh was brittle. "Because I'm going to die anyway." The certainty in her voice was unsettling. "If Sung-jin doesn't find me tonight, he'll find me tomorrow. Or next week. Or next month. He has resources. Connections. I've tried to leave before, twice, and both times I woke up in a hospital with injuries consistent with a car accident and a police report filed by someone I'd never met." She swallowed hard. "The only reason I'm not dead already is because I was useful. His exotic trophy. His proof that he was sophisticated enough to acquire a beautiful African woman and civilized enough to keep her." The disgust in her voice was visceral. "But now," she continued, "I've seen something I wasn't supposed to see. And I have proof. Which means I'm not useful anymore. I'm a liability." "What kind of proof?" Imani's hand moved toward her discarded dress, where the hidden pocket bulged slightly with the outline of a phone. Then she stopped. "Why do you care?" It was a fair question. Ji-hoon had built his empire on pragmatism, not sentiment. He didn't rescue strangers from alleys. He didn't involve himself in domestic disputes, no matter how violent. He certainly didn't harbor women fleeing from men like Park Sung-jin, men with political connections and the kind of ruthlessness that made enemies disappear without a trace. But something about Imani Balagan had caught his attention the moment he'd seen her crumpled against that alley wall. Something beyond the obvious beauty, the dark skin that seemed to drink in the light, the high cheekbones, the full lips now cracked from dehydration. Something beyond the elegance that persisted even through her trauma. It was the way she held herself. Like a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself from the inside out, only to be broken again. And again. And again. He recognized that exhaustion. That peculiar strength that came from having nothing left to lose. "Because Park Sung-jin is connected to people I have a professional interest in," he said finally. "And because whatever you found might be valuable to me." Imani studied him for a long moment. He let her look, keeping his expression neutral, knowing she was trying to read him the way he'd been reading her since he'd first seen her in that alley. "If I show you," she said slowly, "you'll either help me or you'll kill me. Those are the only options." "Yes." The honesty seemed to startle her. Most men would have offered reassurances, promised protection, sworn they meant no harm. But Ji-hoon had learned early that lies were expensive and truth was efficient. "And you won't pretend otherwise," she said. Not a question. "No." She reached for the dress. The phone screen was cracked, but the files were intact. Ji-hoon scrolled through the photographs in silence, his expression unchanging even as the images grew progressively more damning. Imani watched his face for any reaction, horror, greed, calculation, but he gave nothing away. "These were taken tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. Just the private suite on the 32nd floor of the rayon. "You were there." "I was Sungjin's date." The party was hosted by Minister Kong, celebrating some trade agreement with the Japanese delegation. "I excused myself to use the restroom and took a wrong turn." Her voice steadied slightly as she recounted the facts. "The door to the private suite was open. I heard voices I recognized. So I looked. And saw this." He turned the phone so she could see the image currently displayed, 4 men seated around a table covered in documents, with a 5th standing before a wall-mounted screen showing what appeared to be shipping manifests. "I saw more than that," Imani said. "Those shipping containers aren't carrying auto parts, Mr. Kwan. And those trade discussions weren't about legitimate commerce. Human trafficking." She flinched at the words, even though she'd known them before she'd spoken to him. There was something different about hearing it confirmed by someone else, something that made it more real, more horrifying, more impossible to deny. "The routes originate in Southeast Asia," she said quietly. "Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar. They're using legitimate shipping companies as fronts, companies connected to Park Sung-jin's import business. The containers arrive at Incheon port, where they're processed through a customs station that Minister Kong controls. The cargo is then distributed through a network of businesses throughout Seoul. Massage parlors, private clubs. Some of them end up in what the documents called private collections." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Almost. You understood all of this from photographs taken during a brief surveillance?" "No." Imani met his eyes. "I understood it because I've been watching for 3 years. Collecting fragments. Piece by piece, whenever Sungjin let his guard down. I just couldn't prove any of it until tonight." The admission hung in the air between them. Ji-hoon set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. "These men," he said, indicating the photograph. "Do you know who they are?" "Park Sung-jin. Minister Kang Dae, Director Lee from the National Police Agency. And the 2 I don't recognize, one Korean, one Japanese. The Korean is Baek Jun-seo. He runs the largest private security firm in the country, supplies guards to half the corporate headquarters in Gangnam." Ji-hoon's voice was flat. "The Japanese delegate is Tanaka Hiro. Officially, he's a trade representative. Unofficially, he coordinates Yakuza operations throughout the Korean peninsula." Imani's blood went cold. "You know them?" "I know of them. There's a difference." His eyes found hers again, sharp enough to cut. "These are not men who tolerate threats to their operations, Miss Baligan. A single photograph would be enough to warrant your death. The complete documentation you have here, shipping routes, financial transfers, government involvement, this is enough to warrant the death of everyone you've ever spoken to." She'd known that. Somewhere, in the part of her mind that was still capable of rational thought, she'd known exactly how dangerous this information was. "Then why haven't you killed me yet?" The question came out more calmly than she felt. Perhaps she was beyond fear at this point. Perhaps 5 years of waiting for death had finally numbed her to its approach. Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment. "Because I'm not them," he said finally. "And because the enemy of my enemy is, if not my friend, at least temporarily useful." "Useful how?" He stood, moving to the window that overlooked Seoul's glittering expanse. From this height, the city looked like a circuit board, millions of lights flickering in patterns that only made sense if you understood the system. Park Sung-jin's organization has been encroaching on my territory for 18 months, he said. Nothing overt. Nothing that would justify direct confrontation. But I've lost 3 legitimate businesses to suspicious regulatory investigations. 2 of my distribution networks were compromised by police raids that somehow knew exactly where to look, and 6 of my people have been arrested on charges that were later dropped for lack of evidence. Imani listened in silence. I knew someone was feeding information to my enemies, Ji-hoon continued. I knew it was connected to political power. But I couldn't prove the scope of it. Couldn't identify all the players. He turned back to face her. You've just handed me the evidence I needed to understand exactly who I'm fighting. And what will you do with it? That depends. On what? On you, Miss Baligan. He crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that she could see the individual threads of ink that made up the tattoo on his neck. A serpent, she realized, coiled in patterns that suggested movement even in stillness. You have 2 choices. You can take this phone and disappear tonight. I'll give you cash, a vehicle, documentation that will get you out of the country. You'll run for the rest of your life, but you might live. Or you can stay. Help me understand the full scope of what you've witnessed. Let me use your evidence to dismantle the operation from the inside. His voice dropped slightly. In exchange, I will guarantee your protection. You will be untouchable as long as you remain under my authority. Imani's heart was pounding. Why would you do that? What's in it for you? Justice. Power. Revenge. Take your pick. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes that might have been emotion. I'm not a good man, Miss Baligan, but I am a consistent one, and I don't traffic in human beings. She believed him. That was the strange part. Despite everything, despite who he was, what he represented, the blood that undoubtedly stained his hands, she believed him. Maybe because his honesty was refreshing after 5 years of Sung-jin's lies. Maybe because her alternatives had narrowed to nothing. Or maybe because something in his stillness reminded her of her own. The quiet that came from surviving things that should have destroyed you. I'll stay, she said. Ji-hoon nodded once. Then we have work to do. 3 days. That was how long it took for them to come. Imani was eating breakfast in Ji-hoon's private dining room, a space of clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that made her feel like she was suspended above the city, when his phone buzzed with a message that made his expression go dangerously flat. Stay here, he said, rising from his chair. What's happening? He was already at the door. Someone is testing the perimeter. She wanted to argue, to demand more information, but he was gone before she could form the words. The door sealed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than a slam. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. She spent them cataloging the room, the exits, the sight lines, the objects that could be used as weapons if necessary. A heavy crystal vase. A bronze sculpture that looked decorative but felt balanced for throwing. The breakfast knife was dull, meant for butter rather than defense, but she palmed it anyway. Old habits. Sung-jin had trained her well, even if the training was unintentional. 5 years of anticipating violence had sharpened instincts she hadn't known she possessed. When the door finally reopened, Ji-hoon was not alone. A younger man followed him in mid-20s, sharply dressed, with an earpiece visible beneath his styled hair. He was carrying something wrapped in black cloth, and his expression was carefully neutral in a way that suggested bad news. Miss Baligan, Ji-hoon said, his voice clipped. This is Min-jun, my head of security. He has something you need to see. Min-jun set the wrapped object on the table and unwrapped it with gloved hands. It was her heel. The broken one. The one she'd abandoned in the rayon service stairwell 3 nights ago. Attached to it was a small white card, the kind used for formal invitations. The message was handwritten in elegant Korean characters. Return what belongs to me, or I will take everything that belongs to you. No signature. None was needed. Imani's stomach dropped. It was delivered to the lobby 40 minutes ago, Min-jun reported. Courier service, paid in cash, untraceable. but the courier described the client as a well-dressed Korean man with a scar on his left hand. Sungjin's assistant, Imani, said quietly, "Kim-do. He handles personal matters." The euphemism hung in the air. "The message wasn't just delivered to the lobby," Ji-hoon said. "It was delivered to my building. Which means either your former owner knows you're here specifically, or he's casting a wide net and hoping for a reaction." "He knows." Imani's voice was steady despite the cold spreading through her chest. "He always knows. I don't know how, but he always finds out." Ji-hoon studied her face for a moment. Whatever he saw there seemed to confirm something. "Min-jun, triple the security rotation on this floor. I want eyes on every entrance to the building, including the service tunnels. And get me everything we have on Park Sungjin's digital surveillance capabilities." "Yes, sir." The younger man withdrew, leaving them alone. Imani stared at the broken heel, at the neat handwriting that promised violence with such elegant restraint. Sungjin had always been like that, polished on the surface, monstrous underneath. The perfect predator for a city that valued appearances above everything. "He'll escalate," she said. "This is just the opening move. He's letting me know he's watching, that running was pointless. The next message won't be a shoe. I'm aware. Are you also aware that he'll go after anyone associated with me? That being in his sights is dangerous for you too." Ji-hoon's expression didn't flicker. "Miss Balogun, I've spent 20 years building an organization that specializes in surviving dangerous situations. Park Sungjin is wealthy and connected, but he's not untouchable. No one is." "You sound very certain." "I am." There was something almost reassuring about his arrogance, or perhaps it wasn't arrogance at all, just the calm confidence of a man who had accurately assessed his own capabilities and found them sufficient. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we accelerate the timeline." He picked up the invitation card, turning it over in his fingers as if searching for hidden messages. "You said you spent 3 years collecting information. I need to see all of it. Every fragment, every overheard conversation, every suspicious document. We're going to build a complete picture of Sungjin's operation, and then we're going to take it apart. That will take time. We have 3 days." Imani blinked. "Why 3 days?" Ji-hoon met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been dark amusement lurking beneath the ice. "Because in 3 days, Minister Kang is hosting another party. And this time I'm going to be there." Working with Ji-hoon was nothing like she'd expected. She'd anticipated interrogation. Demands for information delivered with the cold efficiency of a man extracting value from an asset. Instead, he approached her knowledge like a puzzle, methodical, patient, occasionally insightful in ways that revealed a mind far more sophisticated than his criminal reputation suggested. They worked in his private study, a room she hadn't known existed until he'd led her through a concealed door in his library. The walls were lined with screens displaying real-time data feeds, stock prices, shipping manifests, surveillance footage from locations she didn't recognize. A massive table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered in documents and photographs connected by colored strings. "You've been investigating him already," Imani realized, studying the web of information. "I've been investigating the network. Sungjin is one node of many." Ji-hoon gestured to a cluster of photographs near the center. "What I didn't have was the full picture. The connections between the legitimate businesses and the trafficking operation. The government involvement at the highest levels. And now you do. Now I'm beginning to." They worked through the day, breaking only for meals that appeared at precise intervals, brought by silent staff members who never made eye contact and never lingered. Imani shared everything she remembered. Conversations she'd overheard, documents she'd glimpsed, patterns she'd noticed in Sungjin's behavior over 5 years of careful observation. It was strange, she realized, to have her knowledge valued rather than suppressed. Sungjin had worked so hard to make her feel stupid, dependent, worthless. But here, in this room full of information, she was essential. "You noticed the quarterly payments," Ji-hoon observed late in the afternoon, studying a timeline she'd helped construct. "The correlation between the shipping schedules and Sungjin's charity galas. The galas were always scheduled 2 weeks after major shipments arrived, Imani confirmed. I thought it was coincidence at first. Then I realized the guest lists overlapped with the names on those shipping manifests. The buyers. She nodded, her stomach turning at the memory. He would introduce them as business associates. Foreign investors, domestic politicians, entertainment executives. They would disappear with Sungjin into private rooms, and when they emerged, there would be new documents to sign. New partnerships to celebrate. Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment. You knew, he said finally. For years, you knew what was happening. And you stayed. It wasn't an accusation, but it felt like one. I tried to leave. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Twice. The first time, I made it to the airport. Immigration flagged my passport, claimed there was a problem with my visa status. By the time the confusion was cleared up, Sungjin's men had arrived. The second time, I went to the police. The detective I spoke to called Sungjin before I'd even finished giving my statement. So you stopped trying. I stopped believing it was possible. She met his eyes, defiant despite the shame crawling up her spine. You can judge me if you want. You weren't there. You don't know what it's like to have every exit blocked before you even reach for it. I'm not judging you, Miss Baligan. Then what are you doing? I'm trying to understand you. He set down the document he'd been examining and gave her his full attention. 5 years in that situation would break most people. But you weren't broken. You were watching, collecting, building a case you had no reason to believe you'd ever be able to use. What else was I supposed to do? Accept it? Let him destroy me completely? The anger felt good, clean and hot after so much cold fear. I couldn't fight him physically. I couldn't escape. So I fought the only way I had left. I made myself remember everything. Every face. Every name. Every transaction. Because someday, somehow, I was going to make sure they paid for what they did. The words hung in the air between them. Ji-hoon studied her face for a long moment, not with calculation, but with something closer to recognition. Survival takes many forms, he said quietly. Not all of them are obvious. The understanding in his voice caught her off guard. She'd expected dismissal, or at best, pragmatic acceptance. Not this quiet acknowledgement that what she'd done had value, had meaning. Why do you care? She asked, echoing her question from that first night. About me, specifically. You have the information. You don't need me anymore. Don't I? I've given you everything I know. You've given me facts. Ji-hoon rose from his chair and moved to the window, his back to her. Facts are valuable, but they're not complete. You spent 5 years inside Sungjin's world. You understand how he thinks, how he reacts, where his weaknesses are. That kind of knowledge can't be extracted in a single debriefing. So I'm still useful. Yes. His honesty should have been cold. Instead, it felt almost respectful, an acknowledgement that she was a person who deserved the truth rather than comfortable lies. And when I'm not useful anymore? Ji-hoon turned to face her. The late afternoon light caught the edges of his face, highlighting the sharp planes of his jaw, the slight darkness under his eyes that suggested he slept as poorly as she did. Then you'll have a choice, he said. You can disappear, new identity, new country, resources to start over. Or you can stay. Stay as what? He didn't answer immediately. Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly to interpret. That depends on what you want, Miss Baligan. The question felt heavier than it should have. More personal. I want them to pay, she said finally. That's what I want. For years, I told myself that just surviving was enough. That living was its own victory. But it's not. Her hands clenched into fists. I watched them buy and sell human beings like merchandise. I watched them destroy lives without a moment's hesitation. And the whole time, they smiled and toasted each other and congratulated themselves on their success. Revenge. Justice. She stood, facing him across the room. There's a difference. Is there? I don't know anymore. The admission felt like another kind of honesty. Maybe not. Maybe I just want to hurt them the way they hurt me. But even if that's all it is, even if it's just revenge, I want it. I need it. I can't walk away until I see them fall. Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment. Then we have the same goal, he said finally. For now, that's enough. The first real attack came at midnight. Imani was asleep, or trying to be, when the alarm pierced through the penthouse. Not a fire alarm, something sharper, more urgent, designed to wake without disorientation. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, the bronze sculpture from the dining room already in her hand. The door to her room slid open, and Min-jun appeared with a gun drawn. "Stay close," he ordered. "We're moving." "What's happening?" "Perimeter breach. East stairwell." He was already guiding her down the hallway, his movements efficient and controlled. "Boss is handling it." "Handling it how?" Min-jun didn't answer. They moved through corridors she didn't recognize, hidden passages, she realized, built into the walls of the penthouse itself. Emergency routes that didn't appear on any blueprint. The architecture was disorienting, designed to confuse intruders who might somehow penetrate this deep. A gunshot echoed somewhere behind them. Then another. Then silence. Min-jun stopped at a reinforced door, entering a code that made the panel flash green. The room beyond was small and windowless, lined with monitors showing feeds from throughout the building. "Wait here," he said. "Don't open this door for anyone except me or Mr. Kwan. Password is Sianmal. Anyone who doesn't give it gets shot through the door." He was gone before she could respond. Imani stared at the monitors, her heart pounding, watching figures move through corridors in jerky black and white footage. She saw Ji-hoon's silhouette, unmistakable even on grainy video, moving with a fluidity that suggested combat training far beyond what she'd assumed. 3 intruders. She counted them on different screens, their faces obscured by balaclavas, their movements coordinated in ways that suggested military precision. Ji-hoon intercepted the first one in the east corridor. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. By the time security arrived, all 3 intruders were incapacitated. 2 appeared unconscious. The third was clutching a broken arm and screaming something Imani couldn't hear through the silent footage. She watched Ji-hoon lean down, his face close to the screaming man's ear. Whatever he said stopped the screaming immediately. The man's expression shifted from pain to terror. The monitors didn't have audio, but she could imagine the words perfectly. "They were professionals," Ji-hoon reported an hour later, his white shirt now spattered with blood that wasn't his own. "Ex-military. Korean Special Forces, based on their training patterns and equipment." Imani sat in his study, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion and a strange, vibrating fear in its wake. Park Sung-jin can hire ex-military assassins? Park Sung-jin can hire anyone. Ji-hoon accepted a fresh shirt from one of his staff, changing without apparent self-consciousness. She looked away, but not before catching a glimpse of the tattoos that covered his torso, an intricate landscape of serpents and waves and flowers that seemed to move in the low light. But the more interesting question is how he knew where to send them. The shoe. The message. The message was a warning, not intelligence. He was fishing, hoping for a reaction that would confirm your location. Ji-hoon buttoned his new shirt with precise movements. Tonight was confirmation. Someone gave him specific information about this building's security systems. A mole. Possibly. Or possibly a data breach. He turned to face her, and despite everything, she noticed the controlled way he moved. No wasted energy, no unnecessary tension. "My systems are sophisticated, but nothing is impenetrable. I'll need to audit everything." What happens to the men who attacked? They'll provide information. Then they'll disappear. The casual way he said it sent a chill down her spine. She'd known what Ji-hoon was from the beginning. She'd heard stories of the cold Korean Mafia boss whose enemies tended to vanish without trace. But knowing and witnessing were different things. "You're disturbed," he observed, watching her face. "I'm adjusting." To what? To being in a world where violence is the default. She set down her untouched tea. Where people disappear and everyone pretends not to notice. Where men like you and men like Sungjin operate by the same rules, just on different sides. Is that what you think? That we're the same? Aren't you? Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, not angry, but something more complex. Park Sungjin hurts people because he enjoys it. Because their pain makes him feel powerful. The violence he inflicts serves his ego, not his interests. He stepped closer, near enough that she could see the flecks of darker color in his eyes. I hurt people because it's efficient. Because in my world, reputation is currency, and a reputation for mercy is a reputation for weakness. The violence I inflict serves a purpose. And that makes it acceptable? No. His honesty was stark. It makes it survivable. There's a difference. She wanted to argue. Wanted to find a moral high ground that didn't crumble beneath her feet. But she couldn't. Because she'd seen what Sungjin's acceptable cruelty looked like. She'd lived inside it for 5 years. And compared to that systematic destruction of human beings, the trafficking, the exploitation, the casual disposal of lives that didn't matter, Ji-hoon's pragmatic violence almost seemed principled. You're not trying to convince me you're a good man, she said finally. No. I told you from the beginning, I'm not. Then what are you? He studied her face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the ice that revealed, just for an instant, something almost human underneath. I'm the man who's going to keep you alive, he said. For now, that has to be enough. The interrogation results arrived 3 hours later. Imani had retreated to her room, unable to sleep but unwilling to watch whatever was happening in the lower levels of the building. When Ji-hoon knocked on her door with a tablet in his hand, she wasn't sure whether she wanted the information or not. The attackers were hired through a cutout, he reported, his voice clinical. 3 layers of separation between them and the client. But one of them remembered a detail, a phrase their handler used during the briefing. What phrase? The senator's woman. Imani's blood went cold. That's what they called me, she whispered. In the stairwell. After I took the photographs. They said they needed to find the senator's woman. Senator Park Sung-ho. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sungjin's uncle. Senior member of the National Assembly, chair of the Committee on International Trade. I've met him. He comes to Sungjin's events sometimes. I thought he was just family. He's the political cover for the entire operation. Ji-hoon set the tablet down, showing her an organizational chart that looked like a spider's web. The trafficking routes run through ports controlled by his committee. The regulatory agencies that should be investigating are staffed by his appointees. The prosecutors who should be building cases are funded by his campaign contributions. The whole system is compromised. At the highest levels. Ji-hoon's expression was grim. Taking down Sungjin was never going to be enough. The rot goes all the way up. So what do? We changed the plan. He began pacing, the first sign of agitation she'd seen from him. Minister Kang's party in 3 days was supposed to be reconnaissance. Identifying players, gathering intelligence. But if they're already moving against you this aggressively, we don't have time for a slow approach. What's the alternative? Ji-hoon stopped by the window, staring out at the city. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, almost distant. You said you took photographs at the rayon. Documentation of the meeting between Sungjin, Minister Kang, Director Lee, and the others. Yes. How much of the conversation did you record? Imani frowned. I didn't record anything. Just photographs. You're certain? She paused, remembering the panic of that moment, the way her hands had shook as she'd raised her phone. I was trying to be quiet. I took pictures. I left. Your phone has a continuous recording feature. It's enabled by default on most models, starts capturing audio whenever the camera is active. Ji-hoon turned to face her. If you were photographing for more than a few seconds, you may have recorded something without realizing it. The implications hit her like a wave. The phone, she said. Where is it? In my secure vault. I'll have it analyzed. For the first time, something like hope flickered in his eyes. If there's audio, if we can hear what they said in that room, then we have more than evidence. We have testimony. From their own mouths. Is that enough? To take them down? It depends on what they said. But if they discussed the operation explicitly. He trailed off, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Then we don't need to infiltrate their network. We just need to get the recording to the right people. Oh, you said the prosecutors are compromised. Not all of them. Ji-hoon's expression sharpened with something that might have been anticipation. There's one prosecutor who's been building a case against ministerial corruption for years. Someone the system hasn't managed to buy or break. If we can get this evidence to her. Prosecutor Yoon Soo-yeon. She's been investigating Minister Kong for tax evasion, a relatively minor charge that gave her access to his financial records. But she suspects there's more. She just can't prove it. And you trust her? I don't trust anyone. Ji-hoon's smile was thin and humorless. But I respect her. She turned down 3 bribes and survived 2 attempts on her life. That kind of commitment to justice is rare enough to be useful. Imani processed this new information, trying to fit it into her understanding of the situation. A prosecutor working against the same enemies. Potential audio evidence that could expose the entire operation. A chance, slim but real, to bring down the men who had made her life a prison. What do you need from me? She asked. Your phone. Your cooperation. And your continued presence. Ji-hoon's eyes met hers with an intensity that made something flutter in her chest. The next few days are going to be dangerous. I need you close. For your safety and for strategic value. Strategic value? Sung-jin is looking for you. Aggressively. Desperately. Which means you know something that terrifies him, something beyond what you've already shared. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne beneath the lingering traces of violence. I need to understand what that is. Before he decides that killing you is worth any cost. I've told you everything I know. Have you? His gaze was searching, probing. In my experience, trauma buries memories we can't afford to carry. Things we saw but didn't process. Details that seemed insignificant at the time but might be crucial now. Imani's hands began to tremble. She knew he was right. There were things she'd locked away, moments she'd refused to examine too closely because examining them meant acknowledging horrors she couldn't afford to acknowledge while still surviving. I'll try, she said. But I can't promise. I'm not asking for promises. His voice softened slightly, still controlled, but warmer than before. I'm asking for honesty. Whatever you remember, whenever you remember it. Nothing is too small to be significant. She nodded, her throat tight. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Try to sleep, Miss Balogun. Tomorrow we start building the case that will destroy them. Imani. He turned back, one eyebrow raised. My name, she said quietly. You keep calling me Miss Balogun. But if we're going to do this together, you should call me Imani. Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, almost invisible, but she caught it anyway. A crack in the ice. Ji-hoon, he said. Not Mr. Kwon. It wasn't much. A small intimacy, barely significant in the grand scheme of things. But it felt like a beginning. She dreamed of the first time Sung-jin hit her. Not the act itself. Her mind had learned to skip over that part, protecting her from reliving the shock and pain. But she dreamed of the moment after, when he'd held her face in his hands and told her it was for her own good. That she was difficult. That she made him lose control. That if she could just be better, quieter, more grateful, he would never have to correct her again. She believed him. That was the part that still burned with shame. She'd apologized. Actually apologized for making him hurt her. And then she'd spent the next 5 years learning to be invisible, to anticipate his moods, to become so small and accommodating that there was nothing left of the woman she used to be. Imani woke with tears on her cheeks and a name on her lips that didn't belong to Sung-jin. A girl's name. Korean. Minso. She lay in the darkness for a long moment, trying to hold onto the fragmentary memory. A face, young, maybe 17 or 18. Terrified eyes. A birthmark on her left wrist shaped like a crescent moon. And a conversation she'd overheard 3 years ago that suddenly felt significant. There was a girl. Ji-hoon looked up from his tablet as Imani entered the study, her hair still damp from the shower, her eyes shadowed with remembered horror. A girl, he repeated. Her name was Min-seo. Or that's what they called her. I don't know if it was her real name. Imani sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had no intention of drinking. I remembered her last night. Or I started to remember. Tell me. It was 3 years ago. Sung-jin had a private event at one of his properties, a resort in Gangwon-do, in the mountains. I wasn't supposed to be there. He'd brought me as a last-minute addition because one of his investors wanted to meet his beautiful foreign girlfriend. The bitterness in her voice was thick. The investor got drunk. Started talking about the merchandise in ways that made me sick. Sung-jin tried to change the subject, but the man kept going. Kept describing specific preferences. Ji-hoon's expression remained neutral, but his hands had gone still on the tablet. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk on the property and found one of the service buildings, a place where staff were supposed to enter to bring supplies. The door was slightly open. Imani's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I looked inside. And I saw her. Min-seo. She was locked in a room with 3 other girls. All young. All terrified. One of them had bruises on her face and another, Imani's voice broke. She couldn't have been more than 15. They were waiting. For what? For buyers, I think. Or for assignment. I don't know exactly. But I saw Min-seo's face clearly, because she was the one closest to the door. She saw me too. We made eye contact for maybe 5 seconds before a guard noticed I was there and escorted me back to my room. What happened to her? I don't know. The words felt like broken glass in her throat. I never saw her again. I tried to ask Sung-jin about the service building the next day, casually, like I was curious about the property. He told me it was just staff quarters. And then he watched me for the rest of the weekend with this look, like he was deciding whether I'd seen too much. Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment. The birthmark, he said finally. You mentioned a birthmark. On her left wrist. Shaped like a crescent moon. He pulled up something on his tablet, scrolling through files with rapid precision. When he found what he was looking for, his jaw tightened. Kim Min-seo. He turned the tablet so Imani could see. Reported missing from her hometown in Cheongju 4 years ago. Her mother filed the report, but the investigation was closed after 3 months. Insufficient evidence to continue. The photograph showed a smiling teenage girl, her hair in pigtails, her eyes bright with the particular innocence of someone who hadn't yet learned how cruel the world could be. Imani's vision blurred. She's probably dead, she whispered. Maybe. Ji-hoon's voice was quiet, but something dark flickered in his eyes. Or maybe she's still out there. Still waiting for someone to find her. How would we even begin to look? We start with what you remember. Every detail of that property, the security layout, the other faces you saw. Then we cross-reference with the shipping manifests and financial records you photographed. He set the tablet aside and met her eyes directly. You've been carrying this for 3 years, Imani. Carrying the guilt of not being able to help her. I should have done something. You were trapped in a prison of your own. You couldn't save yourself. How were you supposed to save anyone else? The logic was cold but not unkind. I still remember her eyes, Imani said quietly. She looked at me like I might be help. Like I might be the one who rescued her. Then let's make sure her hope wasn't wasted. Ji-hoon stood, his presence suddenly larger than the room could contain. We're going to tear apart everything Park Sung-jin has built. Every trafficking route, every corrupt official, every buyer who thought their money made them untouchable. And when we're done, the whole world is going to know what they did. Is that justice? Or revenge? Does it matter? She looked up at him, this cold Korean mafia boss who had saved her from an alley and hidden her in his fortress and was now planning to wage war against some of the most powerful people in the country. There was no warmth in his face. No comfort. But there was something else. Something that felt, in this moment, more valuable than kindness. There was conviction. No, she said finally. I suppose it doesn't. The investigation deepens as Imani's recovered memory reveals a direct connection between her trauma and the trafficking network, a missing girl whose face she can't forget. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon's plan to use Minister Kang's party as a strategic strike is accelerating, and the enemies closing in are more dangerous than either of them anticipated. The audio recording on Imani's phone may contain the evidence needed to bring down the operation, but retrieving it will require both of them to walk into the heart of enemy territory. The phone had been recording for 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Ji-hoon's technical specialist, a slight, nervous man named Cho who rarely made eye contact with anyone, had extracted the audio overnight. Now he played it through the secure speakers in Ji-hoon's study while Imani and Ji-hoon listened in silence. The quality was poor, muffled by fabric and distance. But the voices were recognizable. The Incheon shipment is behind schedule. The buyers in Osaka are getting impatient. Park Sung-jin. His smooth, cultured voice made Imani's skin crawl. Tell them patience is a virtue. The customs inspections have increased since that incident in Busan. Minister Kang. She'd recognize his pompous tone anywhere, the voice of a man who expected the world to bend to his will. The inspections are manageable. I've arranged for our people to handle the specific containers. But we need to discuss the domestic distribution. Seoul demand is outpacing supply. A third voice. Director Lee from the National Police Agency, the man tasked with protecting citizens from exactly this kind of crime. Imani closed her eyes. Then increase the acquisition rate. The northern routes through China are still operational. Or use the diplomatic pouches. Tanaka can arrange coverage through the Japanese embassy. The fourth voice was accented. The Yakuza representative. The diplomatic route is risky. If anyone examines the weight discrepancies. No one examines anything. Minister Kang again, dismissive. I've ensured that the relevant officials understand the consequences of excessive curiosity. Besides, our friends in the Blue House have more pressing concerns than customs irregularities. The recording continued, detailing logistics and payments and arrangements that made Imani's stomach turn. Names were mentioned. Buyers, transporters, corrupt officials at every level of government. Dates and figures and routes that connected the dots between the photographs she'd taken and the human cost they represented. When the audio finally ended, the silence in the room felt suffocating. This is enough, Cho said quietly, his eyes fixed on his equipment rather than either of them. More than enough. If this reaches the right hands. It will, Ji-hoon interrupted. Thank you, Cho. Leave us. The specialist gathered his equipment and disappeared without a word. Imani's hands were shaking. She couldn't seem to stop them. They talked about it like it was any other business, she whispered. Supply and demand. Acquisition rates. Like they were discussing electronics or automobiles instead of human beings. Ji-hoon's voice was flat, controlled, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. Yes, they did. How do they live with themselves? They don't have to. In their minds, the people they traffic aren't people. They're products. Revenue streams. Statistics on a spreadsheet. He moved to the window, his back to her. It's easier to commit atrocities when you convince yourself your victims aren't human. Is that what happened to you? The question escaped before she could stop it. Ji-hoon went very still. In the underworld, she continued, her voice unsteady, the violence you commit. Do you convince yourself the victims aren't human? For a long moment, he didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, quieter than she'd ever heard it. No. I always know exactly what I'm doing. And to whom? He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. That's the difference, Imani. I don't lie to myself. I carry the weight of every choice I've made, every life I've taken, every person I've destroyed. I know their names. I remember their faces. And I've made my peace with the monster I've become. That's not peace. That's penance. His laugh was humorless. Maybe. Does it matter? Yes. She stood, crossing the space between them without knowing why. It matters because you're not like them. You know it's wrong. You feel it. They don't feel anything. And that makes it acceptable? Knowing the damage I cause? It makes you human. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough to see the flecks of darker color in his eyes, the slight shadows beneath them that spoke of sleepless nights and memories that wouldn't fade. They stopped being human a long time ago. Ji-hoon studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're trying to save me, he said. Not a question. I'm trying to understand you. Why? Because you saved me. Because you're the first person in 5 years who's treated me like I matter. Because when I look at you, I see something familiar. Someone who's been broken and rebuilt themselves into something harder, someone who survives by becoming what the world demanded. She didn't say any of that. Because we're the same, she said instead. Survivors. Monsters. Whatever you want to call it. We're the same. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the ice that revealed, just for an instant, the man beneath the cold Korean Mafia boss persona. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were warm, gentle in a way that seemed impossible for hands that had caused so much damage. We should focus on the task, he said quietly, but he didn't move away. Minister Kang's party is tomorrow night. I know. It will be dangerous. I know. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. We have the evidence. We have the plan. And we have each other. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to address. Ji-hoon's hand dropped to his side. Get some rest, he said, his voice rough. Tomorrow we end this. The gown arrived at sunset. Black silk, cut to flow like water, with a neckline that suggested elegance rather than exposure. The back dipped low enough to reveal the scar tissue that Sungjin's cigarettes had left on her shoulder blade, scars she'd spent years hiding, and now chose to display as a kind of armor. Let them see what he did to me, she thought as she studied herself in the mirror. Let them know what kind of monster they're protecting. A knock on her door interrupted her preparations. Come in. Ji-hoon entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He was dressed in a tuxedo so perfectly tailored it seemed designed specifically for his body, dark fabric that emphasized the controlled power in his shoulders, the dangerous elegance of his movement. The tattoos on his neck and hands were visible, deliberate, a reminder that the man beneath the formal wear was not someone to be underestimated. But it was his expression that caught her attention. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin flush, not with fear, but with something warmer. Something she hadn't felt in years. You look. He stopped, seeming to search for words that didn't come. Acceptable, she offered, trying to lighten the moment. Devastating. The word was barely audible. You look devastating. The compliment landed like a blow, unexpected and overwhelming. That's the plan, isn't it? She turned back to the mirror, avoiding his eyes. Draw attention. Create a distraction while your people plant the evidence. Yes. He moved closer, close enough that she could see his reflection behind hers. But that's not what I meant. Ji-hoon. I know. His voice was controlled again, the cracks sealed over. This isn't the time. There's too much at stake, too many ways this could go wrong. But after tonight, I might be dead. Or running. Or locked in one of Sungjin's private cells. That won't happen. You can't promise that. No. He met her eyes in the mirror. But I can promise that if anyone tries to take you, they'll have to go through me first. The ferocity in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the calculated protection of a crime lord defending an asset. This was something raw, more personal. Something that scared her almost as much as the enemies they were about to face. We should go, she said quietly. The party starts in an hour. Ji-hoon nodded once, the moment passing. But as he escorted her to the elevator, his hand resting at the small of her back with a possessiveness that felt both protective and claiming, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. that they were walking towards something that couldn't be undone. Minister Kang's estate sprawled across the hills outside Seoul like a monument to corruption, all glass and steel and carefully manicured gardens that cost more annually than most families earned in a lifetime. The party was already in full swing when they arrived, the circular driveway lined with luxury vehicles and the entrance flanked by security personnel whose expensive suits couldn't quite hide the bulges of weapons beneath. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached the front doors. "Remember," Ji-hoon murmured, his lips barely moving. "You're with me. No one touches you without consequences. And if Sung-jin is here? He will be. But he won't approach you directly. Not with me present. His ego won't allow him to create a scene in front of witnesses." "You sound certain." "I've studied him." Ji-hoon's hand tightened slightly on her back. Men like Park Sung-jin need to feel in control. Public confrontation would suggest he's lost that control. He'll wait, but try to isolate you when he sees an opportunity. And when he does? He'll find me waiting. The words sent a chill down her spine, not from fear of Ji-hoon, but from the cold certainty that violence was coming. That before this night was over, blood would be spilled. They entered the party. The main hall was a cathedral of excess, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across marble floors, waiters circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, guests dressed in enough designer fashion to bankrupt a small nation. Imani recognized faces from the photographs, from the recording, from 5 years of forced smiles and careful survival. Director Lee was near the bar, laughing too loudly at something a woman half his age had said. Baek Jun-seo, the security magnate, was in deep conversation with a Japanese delegate she didn't recognize. Minister Kang himself held court near the grand staircase, surrounded by admirers and supplicants. And there, on the far side of the room, watching her with eyes that had haunted her nightmares for years, Park Sung-jin. He was smiling. "Don't look at him," Ji-hoon commanded softly. "Not yet. Let him wonder. I'm not sure I can do this. You've survived 5 years of his cruelty. You can survive one more night." She wanted to argue, to explain that this was different, that being in the same room with him while pretending to be untouchable was torture of a specific and unbearable kind. But Ji-hoon was already guiding her toward the bar, moving with the easy confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. And perhaps, she realized, that was exactly the point. In this environment, surrounded by predators who valued power above all else, Ji-hoon's aura of control was the most effective armor she could wear. Every step she took at his side reinforced the message. She was no longer alone. No longer vulnerable. No longer Sung-jin's property. She belonged to someone far more dangerous. The thought should have disturbed her. Instead, it felt like freedom. The confrontation came 2 hours into the party. Imani had been tracking Sung-jin's movements all evening, hyper-aware of every time he glanced in her direction, every whispered conversation with his associates. He was circling, she realized. Testing boundaries. Waiting for the moment when Ji-hoon's attention was elsewhere. That moment came when Minister Kang approached Ji-hoon directly. "Mr. Kwan." The minister's smile was practiced and false. "I wasn't expecting to see you at my little gathering. We don't often travel in the same circles." "We travel in exactly the same circles, Minister." Ji-hoon's voice was smooth, pleasant in a way that suggested violence lurking beneath. "We simply prefer not to acknowledge it publicly." The minister's smile tightened. "Indeed. And your companion, I don't believe we've been introduced. This is Imani." Ji-hoon didn't offer a surname. "She's under my protection." The emphasis on the final word was unmistakable. A claim. A warning. But the minister was already glancing over Ji-hoon's shoulder, his expression flickering with something Imani couldn't read. She turned. Sung-jin was there. Less than 3 feet away, his handsome face twisted with an expression that mixed rage and triumph in equal measure. Up close, she could see the signs of stress she'd missed from across the room, the slight redness around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip on his champagne glass. "Imani." He said her name like a possession reclaimed. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Have you?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Strange. I wasn't hiding. Weren't you? He stepped closer, deliberately invading her space. Running in the middle of the night. Refusing my calls. Taking shelter with known criminals. What would you call it? Self-preservation. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You belong to me, Imani. You've always belonged to me. Whatever lies this man has told you. Enough. Ji-hoon's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He positioned himself between Imani and Sung-jin with a fluid grace that spoke of combat training far beyond what the party's refined atmosphere suggested. Miss Balogun is a guest in my home, he said, his tone pleasant but his eyes flat and cold. Whatever claim you believe you have on her ended the night she chose to leave. She didn't choose anything. Sung-jin's composure cracked slightly. She was manipulated. Frightened. She doesn't understand. I understand everything. Imani stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of strength she had. I understand that you beat me. Trapped me. Paraded me like a trophy while you bought and sold human beings. I understand that Minister Kang and Director Lee and everyone else in this room are complicit in crimes that would make international headlines if they were ever exposed. The words fell like stones into a still pond. Around them, conversations died. Heads turned. The comfortable mask of the party began to crack. My dear, Minister Kang interjected smoothly, his politician's smile firmly in place, you seem to be under some misapprehension. Perhaps you should check your servers, Ji-hoon interrupted. In approximately 3 minutes, every news outlet in Korea will receive copies of audio recordings documenting your involvement in human trafficking, along with shipping manifests, financial records, and the testimony of 3 survivors who have agreed to speak on the record. The minister's face went gray. You're bluffing. I never bluff. Ji-hoon pulled out his phone and showed the screen, a countdown timer reaching its final seconds. In fact, I believe we're out of time. The phone buzzed. Across the room, other phones began buzzing. Vibrating. Lighting up with incoming notifications. And then someone screamed. The next few minutes were a blur of motion and sound. Security personnel rushed toward the exits. Guests scattered in panic. Minister Kang was shouting into his phone while Director Lee stumbled toward a side door, his face the color of ash. But Imani's attention was fixed on one person. Park Sung-jin stood frozen, his champagne glass shattered at his feet, staring at his phone with an expression of absolute devastation. She watched him scroll through the news reports, watched the color drain from his face as he realized the extent of the exposure. Then his eyes found hers. And all the devastation transformed into murderous rage. You, he breathed, advancing toward her despite the chaos. You did this. You destroyed everything. Ji-hoon intercepted him before he could take more than 2 steps. The violence was swift and brutal. Sung-jin swung first, a sloppy punch born of rage rather than training, and Ji-hoon deflected it with contemptuous ease before driving his fist into the other man's solar plexus. Sung-jin doubled over, gasping. Touch her again, Ji-hoon said quietly, and I will take you apart piece by piece. Not because of the recording. Not because of the trafficking. But because you dared to bruise what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, it made her feel more protected than she had in years. We need to go. Min-jun appeared at her elbow, his expression tense. The police will be here in minutes. Our people have secured the evidence and extracted the key witnesses. But this location is about to become very complicated. Ji-hoon nodded, his gaze never leaving Sung-jin's crumpled form. Get her to the car. I'll be there shortly. Ji-hoon, Imani started. Go. He finally looked at her, and something in his eyes softened. I'll find you. I promise. She wanted to argue. Wanted to stay by his side, to face whatever came next together. But Min-jun was already guiding her toward a service exit, and the sounds of sirens were growing closer. She went. The drive back to Jean Tower was silent. Imani sat in the back of an armored SUV, watching the city lights blur past, trying to process everything that had just happened. The exposure. The chaos. Sungjin's face when he realized his empire was crumbling. Ji-hoon's voice when he called her his. "He'll be fine," Minjun said from the front seat, misreading her silence. "Boss has contingencies for contingencies. The police won't hold him, not with the evidence pointing in other directions." "I know." She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. "That's not what I'm worried about." "Then what?" She didn't answer. How could she explain that she was worried about herself? About the feelings that had crept up on her in the space of a few days. Feelings for a man who was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully comprehend? Ji-hoon had saved her. Protected her. Given her the tools to destroy the monster who had tormented her for half a decade. But he'd also awakened something she'd thought was dead. A capacity for trust, for connection, for the kind of terrifying vulnerability that came with caring about another person. And that scared her more than anything Sungjin had ever done. Because Sungjin had hurt her body. Had damaged her pride. Had tried to destroy her sense of self. But Ji-hoon could hurt her heart. And she wasn't sure she could survive that. Ji-hoon returned to the penthouse just before dawn. Imani had been waiting in the study, unable to sleep, watching news coverage of the scandal unfold across multiple screens. Minister Kang had been taken into custody. Director Lee had resigned pending investigation. 3 other officials had been suspended. And Park Sungjin was in the wind. "He escaped," Ji-hoon said without preamble, entering the room with a controlled fury that made the air feel electric. "Someone warned him before the arrests began. He's disappeared." "Where?" "We don't know yet. But we'll find him." He moved to the window, his shoulders tense. "I'm sorry, Imani. This should have been over tonight." "It's not your fault." "Isn't it?" He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw exhaustion in his features. "I planned this operation. I anticipated every variable except betrayal from within. Someone in my organization leaked information to Sungjin." "You know who?" "I have suspicions. They're being verified." The clinical way he said it told her everything she needed to know about what verification meant. "Will you kill them?" "Yes." No hesitation. No regret. "They endangered you. That makes it personal." Imani stood, crossing the room to where he stood by the window. The early morning light was soft, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. Up close, she could see the tiny cuts on his knuckles, the faint bruise forming on his jaw, the signs of violence that his tailored clothing couldn't quite hide. "You keep saying that," she said quietly. "Personal. Like I'm something that belongs to you. Does that offend you?" "No." The admission surprised her even as she spoke it. "It should. I spent 5 years as someone's possession. I swore I would never let anyone own me again." "I don't want to own you, Imani." "Then what do you want?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze searching her face as if looking for something he wasn't sure he'd find. "I want to keep you safe," he said finally. "I want to watch you heal. I want to stand beside you while you rebuild the life that was taken from you." The pause. "And I want you to want to stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Not because I'm your only protection. But because you choose me. Choose this. This. Whatever this becomes." He reached out, brushing his knuckles gently against her cheek. "I'm not a good man, Imani. I never claimed to be. But with you, I want to be better." The words shattered something inside her. For 5 years, she'd been told she was worthless. Difficult. A burden. For 5 years, she'd been systematically dismantled until she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. And now this cold Korean mafia boss, this dangerous, damaged man, was looking at her like she was something precious. Something worth changing for. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Trust. Connection. Any of it. Sungjin destroyed those parts of me. Then we'll rebuild them." His hand moved to cup her face, gentle and steady. "Together. Slowly. At whatever pace you need." "And if I can't? If I'm too broken? Then I'll love you broken." The word escaped before he could stop it, and something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, at his own confession. "The way you've loved yourself broken all these years. The way you survived and fought and collected evidence against your abuser even when you had no hope of escape. The way you came to me with information that could have gotten you killed because you couldn't walk away without trying to stop them. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know what love looks like anymore, she said. He twisted it so badly. This. Ji-hoon leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. This is what it looks like. Quiet, patient, present. I'm not asking you to trust me with your heart today. I'm asking you to let me earn it, however long it takes. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she let herself fall. The traitor was identified 3 days later. Imani had been working in Ji-hoon's study, helping to analyze the cascade of arrests and resignations that followed the scandal, when Min-jun entered with an expression that made her blood run cold. We found him, the security chief said grimly. Han Sung-woo. He's been on the payroll for 6 years. Passed 3 loyalty screenings. But he's been feeding information to Park Sung-jin for at least 18 months. How? Ji-hoon's voice was dangerously calm. Sung-jin has his daughter. Took her 2 years ago, staged it as a drowning accident. Sung-woo has been receiving video evidence that she's alive every month, contingent on his continued cooperation. The silence that followed was absolute. Imani felt sick. This wasn't a simple betrayal, it was coerced collaboration, born from the same kind of manipulation Sung-jin had used on her. A father desperate to save his daughter, forced to betray people he'd worked with for years. Where is he now? Ji-hoon asked. Holding room 7. He's not resisting. Said he expected this. Ji-hoon stood, his expression unreadable. I need to speak with him. Ji-hoon, Imani started. Not now. He moved toward the door, then paused. Min-jun, keep her here. Increase the security rotation until I return. He was gone before she could argue. The confrontation in holding room 7 lasted less than 20 minutes. Imani didn't know what was said. Didn't know what Ji-hoon had seen in the broken man's face, or what calculations had run through his mind as he processed this new information. But when he returned to the study, something had changed. He's being relocated, Ji-hoon said without preamble. Safe house outside the city. We're extracting his daughter. Extracting? I thought. Sung-jin has been keeping her at a private compound in Gimpo. We've confirmed her location through surveillance footage Sung-woo was able to provide. A team is moving tonight. Imani stared at him, struggling to reconcile this decision with the cold pragmatism she'd come to expect. You're not going to kill him. No. Ji-hoon moved to the window, his favorite position when processing difficult emotions. He was coerced. His crime was loving his daughter more than his obligations to me. I can't punish that. Not when I understand. He trailed off. Understand what? A long pause. What it feels like to do terrible things for someone you love. The admission hung in the air, weighted with implications Imani wasn't sure she was ready to explore. You've done that before, she said quietly. Terrible things. For someone. Once. A long time ago. His voice was barely audible. My mother. She was dying. The treatments she needed weren't available through normal channels, not for someone of our social class. So I made a deal. Became someone I never intended to be. Built this empire from blood and compromise. Did it work? No. The word was hollow. She died anyway. And I was left with the monster I'd become. Imani crossed the room to stand beside him. The Seoul skyline stretched before them, millions of lights that represented millions of lives, most of them unaware of the underworld that operated in their shadows. You could have walked away, she said, after she died. Started over. Tried. Once. His laugh was bitter. But empires don't release their kings easily. And by then, the monster had become comfortable, useful, easier to be than whatever I'd been before. Do you regret it? He was silent for a long moment. I regret that I don't regret it more. He turned to face her, and his eyes held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. I regret that the only time I feel close to human anymore is when I'm with you. The confession hit her like a physical blow. Ji-hoon. You asked me once what I wanted. This is it, Imani. This impossible thing between us. This chance to be seen by someone who understands darkness but hasn't surrendered to it completely. He reached for her hand, and his fingers trembled slightly as they intertwined with hers. You make me remember who I was before the blood. Before the compromises. Before all of it. I'm not that person either. Not anymore. I know. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But maybe we can find them together. The people we were before the world broke us. Or maybe we can become something new. Something neither of us has ever been. She should have been afraid. Should have pulled away from this dangerous entanglement with a man who held power over life and death. Instead, she stepped closer. Together, she repeated. I like the sound of that. The extraction team returned successful. Kim Min-seo, the girl with the crescent moon birthmark, was found in Sung-jin's Gimpo compound along with 11 other young women. She was 19 now, 3 years older than when Imani had seen her terrified face through that service building door. Seeing her alive should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like looking into a mirror that reflected nightmares. She hasn't spoken since we brought her in, Dr. Yoon reported quietly, standing outside the medical suite where Min-seo was being examined. The physical damage is extensive. Multiple healed fractures. Evidence of repeated assault. Malnutrition consistent with prolonged captivity. Imani pressed her hand against the glass window, watching the young woman stare at nothing. Can I see her? Not yet. She needs to be stabilized first. And given your connection to her history, I understand. But she didn't move from the window. Ji-hoon found her there an hour later, still watching. The others are recovering, he said, standing beside her. We've contacted families where possible. The ones without families will be provided for, housing, therapy, whatever they need. It won't be enough. No, it won't. He didn't try to offer false comfort. But it's what we can do. Sung-jin is still out there. Yes. Imani finally turned away from the window, her expression hardening into something that surprised even her. I want to help find him. Imani. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't tell me it's too dangerous. Don't tell me to stay here where it's safe. I spent 5 years being passive, being controlled, being protected by people who didn't protect me at all. This is my fight now. He took those years from me. He destroyed those girls' lives. And I will not sit in this tower and wait for news. Ji-hoon studied her face for a long moment. What are you proposing? I know his habits. His routines. The people he trusts, the places he goes when he's scared. She stepped closer, her chin lifting defiantly. You have resources. I have knowledge. Together, we can find him faster than your people can alone. And when we find him? Then you do what you do best, Imani finished, her voice steady despite the darkness of the implication. And I watch him understand that he's not untouchable anymore. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A recognition, perhaps, of the woman standing before him. Not the broken victim who'd collapsed in his alley. Not the traumatized survivor who flinched at shadows. This was something new. Someone forged in fire, emerging from the ashes with teeth bared. You've changed, he observed quietly. I'm becoming who I should have been 5 years ago. She held his gaze without flinching. Before he convinced me I was nothing. Before I forgot that I was strong enough to survive things that should have destroyed me. And if this hunt destroys you instead? Then at least I'll go down fighting. On my terms. Not his. The silence between them stretched taut as a wire. Then Ji-hoon nodded once. We start tonight. Sung-jin's escape route became clear within 48 hours. Ji-hoon's network stretched across Seoul's underworld like a spider's web, and no prey could move through it without disturbing a thread somewhere. Reports trickled in from safe houses, informants, and surveillance teams stationed at every major exit point from the city. Park Sung-jin had fled south. Toward Busan. Toward the port. He's trying to leave the country, Min-jun reported, spreading satellite imagery across the study's central table. We've identified a private vessel registered to one of his shell companies. It's scheduled to depart in 72 hours. Destination? Ji-hoon asked. Japan, initially. From there, likely Southeast Asia. The trafficking routes he established run both ways. He's got contacts in Thailand and Vietnam who would shelter him. Imani studied the images, her mind racing through possibilities. He won't go directly to the port. That's too obvious. He knows you're watching. Where then? She closed her eyes, sifting through memories she'd spent years trying to suppress. Sungjin's voice. His habits. The places he mentioned when he thought she wasn't listening. There's a resort, she said slowly. Outside Gyeongju. He took me there once, years ago. Said it was owned by a family friend. Someone he trusted completely. Someone who owed him favors. Name? I don't know. But I remember the location. The private hot springs. The way the mountains looked at sunset. She opened her eyes. If he's scared, if he needs to disappear before reaching the port, that's where he'll go. Ji-hoon exchanged a glance with Min-jun. Check it, he ordered. Every property within 50 kilometers of Gyeongju with private hot springs and mountain views. Cross-reference with known associates of the Park family. Yes, sir. The security chief withdrew, leaving them alone. Imani's hands were trembling again. She clenched them into fists, trying to hide the evidence of her fear. This is different than the party, Ji-hoon said quietly, reading her state with unsettling accuracy. At Minister Kang's estate, you were making a statement. Exposing the truth. This is hunting. I know. Hunting requires a different mindset. Patience. Cold calculation. The ability to see your target as prey rather than person. I know. Can you do that? After everything he's done to you, can you look at him without seeing the monster who hurt you? The question cut deeper than she expected, because the honest answer was no. She couldn't look at Sungjin without seeing 5 years of terror. Couldn't hear his voice without feeling his hands around her throat. Couldn't imagine confronting him without some part of her wanting to curl up and disappear. But there was another part of her now. A harder part. The part that had photographed evidence while her abuser slept in the next room. The part that had collected fragments of his crimes like weapons, waiting for the moment to strike. That part was louder than the fear. I can do it, she said, because he stopped being a person to me a long time ago. He's just a problem that needs to be solved. Ji-hoon studied her face for a long moment. Good, he said finally. Hold on to that. When we find him, you'll need it. The resort was identified within 6 hours. A private compound nestled in the mountains outside Gyeongju, owned by a retired judge who had ruled in Sungjin's favor on 3 separate occasions. Surveillance confirmed activity, vehicles arriving, security patrols, lights burning through the night. Park Sungjin was there. But moving against him immediately would be a mistake. The compound was fortified. The terrain was difficult. And Sungjin's remaining loyalists were desperate men who knew their futures depended on their boss's survival. So they waited. And waiting, Imani discovered, was its own kind of torture. She spent the hours studying the compound's layout, memorizing entry points and escape routes, rehearsing scenarios until her mind felt raw. Ji-hoon's team prepared with military precision, weapons checked, communications tested, contingencies planned for every possible outcome. But between the preparations, in the quiet moments when there was nothing to do but think, the ghosts crept back in. She found herself in the penthouse's private garden on the second night, a rooftop oasis of carefully tended plants that seemed impossible this high above the city. The August heat had finally broken, replaced by cooler air that carried the first hints of autumn. Ji-hoon found her there, staring at the moon. Can't sleep? Could you? Knowing what's coming? He settled beside her on the stone bench, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I stopped sleeping well years ago. The anticipation of violence doesn't make it worse. What does? The aftermath. His voice was quiet. The faces you can't forget. The moments you wish you could take back. The pause. The person you see in the mirror when it's over. Imani turned to look at him, struck by the vulnerability in his words. You talk about yourself like you're already damned. Aren't I? I don't know. She faced forward again, watching clouds drift across the moon. I used to think morality was simple. Good people and bad people. Right choices and wrong choices. Then I spent 5 years in hell and realized that survival doesn't always leave room for righteousness. And now I think we're all just trying to live with the things we've done. The choices we've made. Some of us succeed better than others. Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment. When I was 17, he said finally, my father ordered me to kill a man. A rival who had insulted our family's honor. I was supposed to prove my worth, show that I was ready to inherit leadership of the organization. Imani held her breath. I did it. His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could hear the cost beneath the words. I walked into that man's home, looked into his eyes, and ended his life. He had a daughter, 12 years old. She was hiding in the closet when I found him. She saw everything. Ji-hoon. I think about her sometimes. Wonder what she became. Whether she spent the last 20 years dreaming of revenge, the same way you've spent the last 5 collecting evidence against Sungjin. He turned to meet her gaze, and his eyes held a pain so profound it took her breath away. That's why I don't believe in redemption, Imani. Some sins can't be forgiven. Some monsters can't be transformed back into men. Then why are you helping me? Fighting for justice against traffickers and corrupt officials? Why does any of it matter if you're already damned? Because it matters to you. The simplicity of the answer stunned her. Because when you look at me, you see something worth saving. Something I stopped believing existed a long time ago. And even if you're wrong, even if there's nothing left to redeem, I want to be worthy of the way you see me. Tears burned behind her eyes. That's not damnation, she whispered. That's hope. Is there a difference? Yes. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Hope is believing you can be better. Damnation is believing you can't. His grip tightened on hers. Then teach me, he said quietly. Because I've forgotten how. They sat in silence as the moon drifted overhead, 2 broken people holding on to each other in the darkness, waiting for the violence that would come with dawn. The assault began at 4 a.m. Ji-hoon's team moved through the mountain darkness like shadows, their approach coordinated through encrypted communications that Imani monitored from a mobile command vehicle parked 2 kilometers from the compound. She hadn't wanted to stay behind. Had argued for her place in the assault team until Ji-hoon had finally silenced her with a look that brooked no opposition. You're not trained for this, he'd said. And I can't focus on the mission if I'm worried about keeping you alive. The admission had stopped her cold. I can't focus if I'm worried about you. So she waited. Watched the feeds from helmet cameras as the team breached the perimeter. Listened to Minjun's terse commands and the guards' surprised shouts when they realized they were under attack. The compound's security was professional but not exceptional. Ji-hoon's team cut through them with brutal efficiency, moving from building to building in a choreographed dance of violence that left Imani simultaneously horrified and impressed. Main building breached, Minjun reported through the comm, ground floor secured. Moving to upper levels. Confirmed, Ji-hoon's voice responded. I'm taking the east wing. Thermal shows 1 signature in the master suite. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. 1 signature. Sungjin. She watched Ji-hoon's helmet feed as he moved through marble corridors that reminded her sickeningly of the homes she'd been paraded through as Sungjin's trophy. Expensive art on the walls. Tasteful lighting. All the trappings of wealth and power that concealed the rot beneath. The master suite door was reinforced, but not enough. Ji-hoon put 2 rounds through the lock and kicked it open. Park Sungjin stood by the window, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. He was holding a gun, some expensive piece that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, but his hand was shaking so badly that the threat was almost laughable. Don't come any closer, he snarled, his cultured voice cracking. I'll shoot. I swear I'll shoot. Then shoot. Ji-hoon's voice was calm. But you should know that my team has eliminated all 12 of your security personnel. Your escape vehicle has been disabled. And the Port Authority has been informed that the Houndy Star is carrying undeclared cargo that requires immediate inspection. The gun wavered. You don't understand. Sung Jin's composure shattered completely, revealing the desperate, terrified man beneath the polished exterior. The people I work for, they'll kill me if I'm taken alive. They'll kill everyone I've ever known. This goes higher than you can possibly imagine. I know exactly how high it goes. Minister Kong is singing like a bird to avoid execution. Director Lee has implicated 17 additional officials. And your uncle, the illustrious Senator Park Sung-ho, was arrested this morning at his home in Pyeongchang. Ji-hoon stepped closer, his weapon trained on Sung Jin's center mass. Your empire is finished. The only question now is how you want this to end. Through the camera feed, Imani watched Sung Jin's face cycle through despair, rage, and finally a terrible, broken acceptance. She did this, he breathed. Imani. My beautiful Imani. She destroyed everything. No. Ji-hoon's voice dropped to something cold and quiet. You destroyed yourself. She just lit the match. The gun rose slightly, and for a frozen instant Imani thought Sung Jin might actually try to shoot. Instead, he turned the barrel toward his own head. Don't, Ji-hoon started. The shot echoed through the speakers. And Park Sung Jin crumpled to the floor. Imani didn't remember leaving the command vehicle. Didn't remember running toward the compound, pushing past security personnel who tried to stop her, climbing stairs that seemed endless until she burst into the master suite and saw the body. He looked smaller in death. That was her first coherent thought. Park Sung Jin, the monster who had loomed so large in her nightmares for 5 years, was just a man. A pathetic, broken man who had chosen death over accountability. Ji-hoon caught her before she could get too close to the blood pooling on the marble floor. Don't, he said quietly. You don't need this image. I need to see. Her voice sounded strange. Distant. I need to know it's over. It's over. Is it? She finally looked away from the body, meeting his eyes. Because I thought I would feel something when he died. Relief. Triumph. Closure. But I don't feel anything. I just feel empty. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. That's normal. Ji-hoon pulled her close, tucking her head beneath his chin in a gesture that should have felt awkward but instead felt like coming home. Revenge never fills the void. Justice never erases the damage. All we can do is survive and try to build something better from the ruins. Is that what we're doing? Building something better? I hope so. His arms tightened around her. I want to believe that's what this is. Not just destruction but creation. Not just ending his evil but beginning something worth having. Imani closed her eyes, letting his heartbeat steady her own. I don't know how to stop being afraid, she admitted. Even with him dead. Even with the network exposed. I keep waiting for the next blow to fall. Then I'll wait with you. However long it takes for you to believe you're safe. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. However long it takes for you to believe you're loved. The word hung in the air between them, spoken so casually as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You said that before, she whispered. That you would love me broken. I meant it. Even after everything? After watching me become someone who could hunt another human being without flinching. Especially after that. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. Because I watched you choose justice over revenge. I watched you try to save lives instead of just destroying enemies. And I watched you hold on to your humanity even when it would have been easier to let it go. I don't feel human. I feel transformed. Different. Like you've passed through fire and emerged as something new. His thumbs brushed away her tears. That's not inhuman, Imani. That's survival. That's strength. That's the most human thing there is. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that the person she'd become was worthy of love, of hope, of a future that didn't include constant fear. But belief was harder than wanting. Show me, she said quietly. Show me how to believe it. Ji-hoon's eyes searched hers for a long moment. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the kind of kiss she'd expected from a man known for cold calculation and brutal efficiency. It was gentle, questioning, a request rather than a demand. Is this okay? Are you okay? Can we be this? She answered by pulling him closer. Sung-jin is dead, but his final words revealed that the conspiracy extends higher than anyone imagined. As Imani and Ji-hoon navigate their growing feelings for each other, a new threat emerges, someone more powerful than Sung-jin, someone who knows Imani's face and Ji-hoon's weaknesses, and someone who has been watching from the shadows all along. The rescue of Kim Min-seo has drawn attention from forces that would prefer the trafficking network to remain hidden. And the choice Ji-hoon faces, between love and survival, may cost him everything he's built. 3 weeks after Park Sung-jin's death, the world finally knew his name. The trial began on a Tuesday morning, broadcast live across every major network in Korea and picked up by international outlets from Tokyo to London. Prosecutor Yoon Soo-yeon, the woman Ji-hoon had identified as untouchable, presented evidence that made headlines for days. Shipping manifests, financial records, surveillance footage, and the damning audio recording that Imani had captured without realizing it. But the true blow came from the witnesses. Kim Min-seo testified on the 5th day. Imani watched from a private viewing room in the courthouse, separated from the proceedings by bulletproof glass and surrounded by Ji-hoon's security team. She hadn't seen Min-seo since the young woman's rescue, had kept her distance to avoid triggering painful memories. But she couldn't look away now. Min-seo's voice was steady as she recounted her kidnapping, her years of captivity, the systematic abuse she'd endured at the hands of men who saw her as property. She named names, buyers, transporters, officials who had turned blind eyes. She described the inside of shipping containers, the smell of fear and desperation, the faces of girls who hadn't survived. The courtroom was absolutely silent. When Min-seo finally finished, she looked directly at the camera. Directly, it seemed, at Imani, and said 3 words that shattered something inside her. "I remember you." The statement hung in the air, weighted with years of hoped-for rescue that had never come. "I remember seeing you through the doorway that night," Min-seo continued. "I thought you were going to save us. When you disappeared, I thought we'd been forgotten. That no one would ever come." Imani's throat closed. "But you didn't forget." Min-seo's voice wavered for the first time. "You remembered us. And you came back. Maybe not then, but eventually. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for remembering." The feed cut to commercial, and Imani found herself unable to breathe. Ji-hoon was beside her in an instant, his hand on her back, his presence a steadying force in the chaos of her emotions. "She doesn't blame you," he said quietly. "She's grateful. She should blame me." The words came out rough, broken. "I saw them. I knew what was happening. And I walked away. You survived. That was all you could do. It wasn't enough. It was everything." He turned her to face him, his eyes fierce with conviction. "If you had tried to intervene that night, you would have been killed. Or worse, you would have been added to their inventory. Another victim. Another statistic. Instead, you survived. You collected evidence. You brought down an empire that had been operating for decades. And because of that, Min-seo is alive and free and testifying against the men who hurt her. That doesn't erase the guilt. No, it doesn't." His voice softened. "Guilt doesn't erase. It evolves. It becomes motivation to do better, to be better. To make sure that what happened to Min-seo never happens to anyone else." Imani leaned into him, letting his strength support her weight. "I don't know how to stop feeling like I failed her." "You don't stop. You just carry it forward. Let it fuel you instead of consuming you." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'll help. That's what we do now. Help each other carry the weight." The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after Min-seo's testimony. Imani was reviewing case documents in Ji-hoon's study when Min-jun burst through the door without knocking, an unprecedented breach of protocol that immediately set her nerves on edge. "We have a problem," the security chief said, his face grim. 3 of our surveillance teams have gone dark. No check-ins. No emergency signals. Just silence." Ji-hoon rose from his desk, his expression shifting from focus to dangerous in an instant. "Locations? 1 near the courthouse. 1 outside the prosecutor's office. 1 in Gangnam, watching a known associate of the late Senator Park. Could be technical failure. All three simultaneously? Within a 15-minute window. Minjun shook his head. This is coordinated. Someone is making a move. Imani's blood went cold. The network, she said quietly. Sungjin's people. They're fighting back. Sungjin is dead. His organization is in shambles. But he said something before he died. She forced herself to remember those final moments, the desperation in his voice. He said, "The people I work for will kill me if I'm taken alive." He said it goes higher than we imagined. Ji-hoon and Minjun exchanged a glance. We knew there were others, Ji-hoon said slowly. International connections. Yakuza involvement. But we assumed they would cut their losses rather than risk exposure. Maybe we assumed wrong. The words had barely left her mouth when the building's alarms began to shriek. The attack was more sophisticated than anything they'd faced before. Unlike the amateur hour attempt by Sungjin's hired mercenaries, this assault was military-grade. Professional. The kind of operation that required significant resources and even more significant planning. Imani found herself in the secure room again, watching the chaos unfold through monitors while Ji-hoon's team fought to repel the invaders. But this time, the invaders knew exactly where to strike. They've breached the secondary elevator shaft. Minjun's voice crackled through the intercom. Moving to intercept. Negative, they're using it as a feint. Another voice, someone she didn't recognize. Main force is hitting the parking structure. How many? 16. Maybe more. They're using suppressed weapons and tactical formations. This isn't street level anymore. Imani's hands shook as she watched the feeds, saw Ji-hoon's people falling back, giving ground they couldn't afford to lose. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. One of the attackers had paused near a security camera, deliberate, almost casual. He looked directly into the lens and smiled. And she recognized him. That's Tanaka Hiro, she breathed. The Yakuza representative from the audio recording. He's personally leading the attack. Which meant this wasn't just cleanup. This was a statement. A message to everyone who had participated in bringing down the trafficking network. You are not safe. We are coming for all of you. The fighting lasted 47 minutes. Ji-hoon's team held the line, barely. The attackers withdrew when reinforcements arrived from allied organizations. Favors called in, debts collected. The complex web of underworld alliances activated in a way that made Imani realize just how much power her protector actually wielded. But the victory came at a cost. 6 of Ji-hoon's people were dead. 9 more wounded. The building's security systems were compromised beyond repair, requiring immediate evacuation to a secondary location. And Tanaka Hiro had escaped. He wasn't here to win, Ji-hoon said, his voice flat with controlled rage. He was here to prove a point. To show that he can reach us anywhere. They were in a new safe house now, a converted warehouse in Incheon, far from the gleaming towers of Gangnam. The space was utilitarian, stripped of the luxury that had characterized Ji-hoon's penthouse, but it was secure. For now. The prosecutor. Imani's voice was hoarse. The witnesses. If he can reach us. Yoon Soo-yeon has been moved to a secure location. The witnesses are scattered across multiple sites with protective details. Ji-hoon ran a hand through his hair, the first sign of genuine exhaustion she'd ever seen from him. But we can't protect everyone forever. Eventually, something will slip through. Then we have to end this. Permanently. How? Tanaka Hiro represents interests that extend across international borders. Yakuza ties in Japan. Triad connections in China. European partners we haven't even identified yet. This isn't a single operation we can take down, it's a hydra. Then we cut off every head. Ji-hoon looked at her, and something in his expression softened despite the circumstances. You sound like me now. Maybe I am you now. Or maybe I'm just someone who's tired of running. She stepped closer, taking his hand. You said once that power is the only currency that matters in your world. Well, I have power now. Information. Connections through the trial. Media attention that makes me harder to kill quietly. Let me use it. How? A press conference. Public testimony. I'll tell everything, not just about Sungjin, but about the international network. The names, the routes, the faces I saw at those parties. Her grip tightened. Make me too visible to disappear. Turn me into a symbol they can't silence without proving everything I've said is true. That's suicide. It's strategy. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. They're hunting us in the shadows because that's where they have the advantage. But in the light? In front of cameras and crowds and international attention? They lose their power. They become targets instead of hunters. Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment. You're asking me to put you in front of the entire world as bait. I'm asking you to trust me. The way I trusted you when I collapsed in your alley. She raised their joined hands, pressed them against her heart. I survived 5 years of abuse because I learned to be invisible. Now I'm choosing to be seen. To make sure they can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt me. And if they kill you anyway? Then at least I'll die fighting. On my terms. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Isn't that what you said you wanted for yourself? A death that means something instead of a life that doesn't. The accusation landed hard. Ji-hoon pulled her close, crushing her against his chest as if he could absorb her into himself, keep her safe through sheer force of will. I've spent 20 years building an empire on the principle that sentiment is weakness, he said, his voice rough. That caring about anyone makes you vulnerable. And then you crash into my life and suddenly all I care about is keeping you alive. Is that so bad? It's terrifying. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. Because I realized something while we were fighting off that attack. When the bullets were flying and my people were dying and everything I'd built was crumbling, the only thought in my head was whether you were safe. Ji-hoon. I love you. The words came out raw, unpolished, completely at odds with his usual controlled precision. I don't know how it happened or when it started, but I love you. And the idea of watching you stand in front of cameras, painting a target on yourself for people who have already proven they can reach us anywhere. Then stand with me. The suggestion stopped him cold. What? Stand with me. At the press conference. By my side. She took a shaky breath. Show them that I'm not alone. That attacking me means attacking you and everything you represent. Make them understand that this isn't just one woman's testimony, it's a declaration of war. Ji-hoon stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. You want me to go public? Reveal my involvement in bringing down the network. I want you to step into the light with me. She reached up, tracing the edge of the tattoo that climbed his neck. You said you were tired of being a monster. Tired of living in shadows. This is your chance to be something else. Something more. The underworld doesn't forgive traitors. Then let it burn. Her voice hardened. Let all of it burn. The secrets and the silence and the carefully maintained walls between the criminals and the people they prey on. Let the whole world see what's been hiding in the dark. For a long moment, Ji-hoon didn't respond. Then he laughed, a genuine sound, almost startled out of him, completely incongruous with the tension of the moment. You're insane, he said. Probably. This could destroy everything I've built. Yes. It could get us both killed. Also yes. He shook his head, still laughing softly. And you think this is a good plan? I think it's the only plan. She smiled up at him, feeling something unfamiliar spreading through her chest. But maybe. Or just the wild exhilaration of having nothing left to lose. I think we've been fighting their war this whole time, playing by their rules, staying in their shadows. And I think it's time we change the game. Ji-hoon's expression sobered, but the warmth in his eyes remained. Together, then, he said quietly. Into the light. Together. The press conference was held 2 days later, in a venue carefully chosen for maximum visibility and security, the main auditorium of Seoul National University, filled with journalists from 47 countries and broadcast live across every major network on the planet. Imani stood backstage, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the microphone would pick it up. Ji-hoon was beside her, dressed in a suit that cost more than most cars but somehow looked like armor. His hand rested at the small of her back, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. "Last chance to back out," he murmured. "Not a chance." The signal came. The stage manager gestured them forward. And together, they stepped into the light. The first 30 minutes were a blur of carefully prepared statements, documented evidence, and projected images that made the audience gasp and the cameras flash. Imani spoke with a steadiness she didn't feel, recounting her years of abuse, her discovery of the trafficking network, her escape and eventual collaboration with authorities. But the real impact came when she introduced Ji-hoon. "This man saved my life," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "He is also one of the most powerful figures in Seoul's underworld. He has committed acts that most of society would condemn. He has built an empire on violence and intimidation and the careful manipulation of power." The audience stirred, uncertain. "And he chose to help me anyway." She turned to face him, ignoring the cameras, speaking directly to the man who had become her unexpected salvation. "He chose justice over profit. He chose to protect victims over preserving his own interests. And he is choosing, right now, to stand beside me and declare that the days of silent complicity are over." Ji-hoon stepped forward. The room went utterly silent. "My name is Kwon Ji-hoon," he said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had made him feared throughout the Korean underworld. "I have spent 20 years building a criminal organization that operates in the shadows of this city. I have done things that cannot be forgiven and made choices that cannot be undone." He paused, letting the admission settle over the crowd. "But there are lines I will not cross. And when I discovered that men I had considered colleagues, men who shared my world and benefited from my protection, were trafficking human beings like cargo, I made a decision. I chose to burn it all down." The questions came fast after that. Accusations, challenges, demands for clarification. Ji-hoon answered them with the same cold precision he brought to everything, acknowledging his crimes without apology while emphasizing his role in exposing the network. But Imani noticed something else happening. With every answer, with every revelation, the narrative was shifting. The man who had been Seoul's most feared crime lord was becoming something else. A whistleblower, a vigilante, a figure of controversial heroism who had turned against his own kind to protect the innocent. It wasn't quite redemption, but it was transformation. Tanaka Hiro made his move during the press conference's closing statements. Later, analysts would piece together how he'd done it. Compromised university security, positioned shooters in maintenance corridors, arranged for diversionary explosions that drew police away from critical checkpoints. In the moment, all Imani knew was that Ji-hoon suddenly shoved her to the floor as glass shattered overhead and the world erupted into chaos. "Move!" he shouted, already pulling her toward a side exit. "Minjun's team is covering the east corridor." A bullet clipped his shoulder. He didn't slow down. They burst through a service door into a corridor filled with smoke and the sound of gunfire. Ji-hoon's people were there, engaging shooters Imani couldn't see, creating a path through the violence. "The roof," Minjun's voice crackled through Ji-hoon's earpiece. "Extraction point is the helipad. 3 minutes." "Understood." Ji-hoon pulled Imani closer, shielding her with his body as they ran. "Stay behind me. Don't stop for anything." They made it to the stairwell before the next wave hit. For shooters, positioned on the landing above. Professional, well-armed, blocking their only escape route. Ji-hoon took down 2 before Imani even registered he'd drawn his weapon. The third went down with a shot from somewhere behind them, Minjun, covering their retreat. The fourth hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, Imani saw something that made her blood run cold. The shooter wasn't aiming at Ji-hoon. He was aiming at her. Time seemed to slow. She saw the barrel rising, saw the finger tightening on the trigger, saw the absolute certainty in the shooter's eyes. And then Ji-hoon was between them. The bullet took him center mass. He didn't fall, not immediately. He stayed standing just long enough to put 3 rounds into the shooter's chest, watching the man crumple before finally allowing his legs to give out. Ji-hoon, Imani caught him before he hit the ground, her hands immediately pressing against the wound, feeling hot blood pulse between her fingers. No, no, no. Moving. His voice was weak, thready. The roof. Extraction. I'm not leaving you. You have to. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes fierce despite the pain. Everything we've done, everything I've done, it means nothing if you die here. You're the testimony. The symbol. You have to survive. I don't care about surviving without you. Then care about living. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. Care about the future we talked about. The life we were going to build. Care about that and get to the roof. Tears streamed down her face. I love you, she whispered. I know. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. I love you too. Now go. Minjun was there suddenly, pulling her away, half carrying her up the stairs while Ji-hoon's remaining team formed a defensive perimeter around their fallen leader. The last thing she saw before the door closed was Ji-hoon's hand, reaching toward her across the blood-stained floor. The helicopter reached a private hospital in 43 minutes. Imani spent every second of that flight in a state of suspended terror, unable to think, unable to process, able only to stare at her blood-covered hands and pray to gods she wasn't sure she believed in. Ji-hoon was rushed into surgery immediately upon arrival. And then the waiting began again. Hours passed. Dawn came and went. The press coverage of the attack dominated every news channel. Speculation about casualties, analysis of security failures, political fallout that was already reshaping the landscape of Korean governance. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the man fighting for his life in a room she couldn't enter. It was nearly sunset when Dr. Yoon finally emerged. Imani shot to her feet, her heart in her throat, unable to read anything from his exhausted expression. He's stable, the doctor said. The words took a moment to penetrate. He's alive? The bullet missed his heart by less than 2 centimeters. Another millimeter in either direction and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Dr. Yoon's voice was clinical, but his eyes were kind. He's going to require extensive rehabilitation. The damage to his shoulder and upper chest was significant. But he's alive, and he's asking for you. Imani didn't remember moving. She was simply there, suddenly, pushing through the door of a private room filled with monitors and 4 lines and the quiet beeping of machines that measured the distance between life and death. Ji-hoon lay in the center of it all, pale against the white sheets, bandages covering his chest and shoulder. But his eyes were open. And they found hers immediately. You made it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're an idiot. She crossed to his bedside, tears streaming down her face. You stepped in front of a bullet. You almost died. What were you thinking? That I couldn't let them take you. His hand found hers, weak but insistent. That after everything we'd survived, I wasn't going to lose you to some hired gun in a stairwell. You could have been killed. Worth it. The simple certainty in his voice broke something inside her, and healed something else. I love you, she said, the words coming easier now. And if you ever scare me like that again, I'll kill you myself. Ji-hoon's laugh turned into a cough, then a wince of pain. But he was smiling. Noted, he managed. Now come here. I've been waiting hours to hold you. She climbed onto the narrow hospital bed, careful of his injuries, fitting herself against his side as if she'd been designed to occupy that exact space. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we heal. Both of us. His arm tightened around her. The network is exposed. The arrests are ongoing. Tanaka Hiro is being hunted by agencies on 3 continents. And the world knows the truth about the trafficking, about the corruption, about all of it. And us. Us. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. We figure out how to live in the light. How to build something that isn't founded on violence and fear. How to be the people we want to become instead of the monsters we were forced to be. That sounds complicated. It will be. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. But I don't want to do it alone. I spent 20 years convincing myself that connection was weakness, that caring about anyone made me vulnerable. And you proved me wrong. You showed me that strength isn't about standing alone, It's about finding someone worth standing beside. Poetic, she murmured. You're sure the blood loss hasn't affected your brain? Probably. His smile softened into something more serious. Stay with me, Imani. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Not because I can protect you. But because you want to. Because this thing between us, whatever we call it, is worth fighting for. She thought about everything they'd been through. The violence. The fear. The moments of unexpected tenderness in the midst of chaos. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth changing for. And she thought about the future stretching out before them. Uncertain. Dangerous. Full of challenges they couldn't possibly anticipate. But also full of possibility. Yes, she said simply. I'll stay. The kiss that followed was gentle, constrained by his injuries and the monitors that beeped in protest when his heart rate elevated. But it was also a promise. A beginning. A declaration that whatever came next, they would face it together. Epilogue. 6 months later. The gallery opening was smaller than she'd expected. A converted warehouse space in Mapogu, far from the glittering towers of Gangnam, filled with art that told stories most people would rather not hear. Photographs of survivors. Sculptures made from the debris of dismantled trafficking ships. Paintings that captured the journey from darkness into light. Imani stood before her favorite piece, a portrait of a young woman with a crescent moon birthmark on her wrist, rendered in shades of gold and shadow. Kim Min-seo had painted it herself. She's talented, Ji-hoon said, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of champagne. His shoulder still troubled him sometimes. The doctors said it might always, but he moved with the same controlled grace that had characterized him from the beginning. She's alive, Imani corrected. That's what matters. Around them, the gallery hummed with conversation. Survivors and advocates and journalists who had covered the trial. Prosecutors and politicians who had pushed through reforms in the wake of the scandal. And ordinary people who had simply wanted to understand, to bear witness to horrors they could no longer ignore. I never thought I'd see this, Imani admitted. Any of it. The network exposed. The survivors finding their voices. The world actually paying attention. And you? What did you think would happen to you? She considered the question carefully. I thought I would die in that mansion, she said finally. Or that I would escape and spend the rest of my life running. Or that I would simply fade away, become another statistic, another anonymous victim lost to a system that didn't care. Instead I'm here. She turned to face him, reaching up to straighten his tie, a gesture so domestic, so ordinary, that it still surprised her sometimes. With you, building something that matters. Becoming someone I never imagined I could be. And who is that? I don't know yet. She smiled, a genuine expression that still felt foreign after so many years of forced pleasantness. Someone brave, I think. Someone who believes that change is possible. Someone who found love in the most unlikely place and decided to hold on to it. Ji-hoon's eyes softened. That sounds like a good person to become. We'll see. She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. We have time to figure it out. They turned to watch the crowd together, survivors and advocates mingling, photographs bearing witness to atrocities that had finally been named, art transforming trauma into testimony. It wasn't a perfect ending. The world was still dangerous. The networks they'd exposed had deep roots that would take years to fully destroy. Ji-hoon's transition from crime lord to legitimate businessman was complicated, messy, full of compromises that made them both uncomfortable. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, Imani had learned, beginnings were enough. Come on, Ji-hoon said, tugging her toward the exit. Min-seo wants to introduce you to someone. Who? Another survivor. Someone who saw your testimony and decided to come forward. He paused, his expression grave. There are more of them, you know. Every week, someone new contacts the foundation. Says they saw you on television and realized they weren't alone. Imani's throat tightened. I didn't ask for that responsibility. No. But you rose to meet it anyway. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. That's what heroes do. I'm not a hero. Tell that to the women whose lives you've saved. He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that still made her breath catch. Tell that to the little girl who watched you testify and decided she could be brave too. Tell that to the monster who learned to love because you showed him how. She wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that she was just a survivor, not a symbol, not a movement, not a hero. But looking around the gallery, at the faces of people who had found hope in her story, at the art that transformed suffering into strength, at the man beside her who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe, she realized that maybe heroism wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was just about refusing to give up. Okay, she said quietly. Let's go meet them. And together, they stepped forward into whatever came next. If this story kept you emotionally invested until the very end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Kwon Ji-hoon? And remember, some people survive love. Others are completely changed by it.